Hello, and welcome back to The Biz. We just recorded an episode on beginning with the end in mind, and it felt natural to me to talk a little bit more about process-based thinking and, essentially trusting the process. When you set a goal, which is sort of like beginning with the end in mind, and I'm a big believer in smart goal setting. I'm sure you're aware of it. If you're watching this video, you've probably done it yourself many, many times. But then the question is, what do we do after that goal? Now, if you're in the Buffalo area like I am, when someone says trust the process, you probably think of Sean McDermott. In fact, now that he's been let go as Bills coach, some are calling it the post process era. And while all that is funny, it did become a little bit of a punchline. And that to me, I always push back against a little bit because I've been a firm believer in the process. And you could tell here at Atlas Wealth Advisors, we're very, very high tech. And we are a little bit high tech, but you'll never probably get me away from the pad and easel, if you will. So if we want to talk about the process, it starts with a goal, right? What am I trying to accomplish? And, could be a big goal, could be a long-term goal, or even something more short-term. And those are certainly things that, you want to do on a regular basis. Like I said, I would encourage you to really think about smart goal setting. With that being said, goal setting is not always easy. You probably also know that too. It may sound easy, but really intelligent, well thought out goals can take some work. But then what do you do, right? So for me, the way I look at it is it's just a simple X and Y axis. And we've got our starting point, of course, right? And the plan, or as I would call it, the process, is simply how are we going to get to our goal from where we are today? And to me, the process isn't just the line. It could be if this is, let's say we're at $100 million today in our practice, and we want to get to a billion, right? Maybe that's a 5-year goal. If that's the case, there's probably, 1,000 little steps to that process, right? I'm trying not to fall down here. I'm so excited. So that process might be 1,000 little check-ins. So how do we know to do that? Well, of course, we need time. And then over here, the way I like to say it is work or maybe discipline. They're kind of synonymous to me a little bit. And the thought process is if you put a plan together. Now I will say this, there's probably nothing you will do or any of us will do in our lives that someone hasn't successfully done in the past, right? Unless you want to, fly to Mars and start a colony there. Anything you're going to want to do in business, in life, has probably been done before. So if you need help, you set a goal. Okay, now I need to figure out the process. That's where you got to do some research, ask around, talk to people like me and other folks in the industry. How do I build out this plan? Because what happens is if you put the work in, is if you know me, you may have heard me say this before. Discipline's great, or sorry, motivation's great. I love to be motivated. But what happens when you're not? You just not do anything those days? No, that's where discipline really kicks in. Because every day you kind of got to show up and work on the plan. Now, sometimes you may find yourself a little bit below the line, and that's okay. That's going to happen. Maybe you'll be a little bit above the line at certain times. That's great, but you're still not at your goal, right? You still got some work to do. But the point is this, the whole idea of the process is to focus on getting there and not too focused on exactly the results you're having. And many of you know that I've coached a lot of hockey in my life. And when I've talked to hockey teams, we talk about this same, whatever our goal is for the season, build the process of how we're going to get there, and every day we show up and do the work. And sometimes, you could get results that maybe aren't real. Hockey's a great example because maybe we played a team and didn't play great, but we got a few lucky bounces. They hit a few posts. We had a better result than we probably deserved. Obviously, the opposite happens all the time too, where you play really great, and we hit a bunch of posts. Their goalie was hot. We really had a nice game, but we didn't get the result on the scoreboard. You sometimes can't just focus on the short-term scoreboard. You got to focus on where you are on this process. And this is how I would encourage you to think about anything. When we talk about beginning with the end in mind, like there could be little opportunities here where we're just trying to get to the line. It may not be the goal. Like this decision may not be about the goal, but it could be about, hey, how do I get to this point in the process? I'm right here right now. I need to be able to make this decision to get to where I want to be. So, hopefully this helps. I would highly encourage you to think about your goals this way and then not get too worried about You might get that unsolicited referral that's like this huge account, and that's awesome. But if it just sort of happened by happenstance, that doesn't mean you're going to get 100 of those, right? So let's do the things it takes in order to get to where we want to be to ultimately hit our goals. And then the last thing I'll say about this is, if you put the work in over time, guess what? You may end up beyond your goal. That $1 billion may turn into 1.3, or maybe for whatever reasons it doesn't. Maybe it turns into 900 million. But if you're starting at 100 million and in 5 years you're at 900 million, and I'm just making that up, obviously, that's still pretty good. And you're probably going to be pretty happy. And then we can set a new goal to get you to that billion and beyond. So, like, once again, hopefully that helps. Thanks for stopping by. Would love to hear from you. If you have any comments or feedback, have a great day.